worried that you might be the cool kid, you wear the latest fashions on top of all the trends? Or have you ever worried you were too much in the mainstream, always so generic, more normal than your friends? Well, we've devised a test to put to rest your fears. There's no need to panic if you lend us your ears. Tonight you can't sleep easy after all that you've heard, 'cause if you like the show, then you're probably a nerd. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all. Tyler, Phil, and Boris. Oh, Canon, it's Canon, it's all in Canon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the It's Canon podcast. That's right, the podcast where we talk about all things, everything, all things geek. We talk about all things comics, all things movies, all things toys, all things video games, all things Star Wars, all things Lego, all things music, all things books, all things, anything and everything. And Phil, do you know what the best part of it all is?
I'm hearing somewhere that it's in canon.
That's right, it's all in canon because it is the It's Canon podcast. We're your hosts on this glorious occasion. I am Boris, and this episode, I am joined by Phil.
Hello, everybody. How you doing out there? It's another exciting week in Star Wars.
And somewhere in the ether, somewhere in wherever he lives is Tyler. He says hi, I'm sure. He's not with us right now, but he will be joining us very shortly. That's right. It is the latest episode of the It's Canon podcast, and this because it is Monday. Phil, do you know what it is?
I'm hearing Mandalorian Mondays, baby.
That's right. As you know, starting last week when the season started, we are taking an up-close and personal analysis review of The Mandalorian. So last week we had an awesome guest. This week we have an awesome guest. Every week we hope to have an awesome guest to discuss in detail what's going on in The Mandalorian. Phil, who do we have this week?
This week, we are very privileged to be joined by Keith Kappel, who is a Star Wars contributor in the sense that he writes a lot of background stuff for the RPG, the Star Wars RPG games. So this is a pretty major discussion, as you're about to encounter. It really hits into our It's Canon wheelhouse, I would say. It's very enlightening, and he's just such a great speaker. It has so much on the go. It's exciting times for me.
Yeah, no, it was an awesome chat. We're going to have an awesome chat because we're going to discuss everything that happened in what a lot of people are calling a filler episode. I personally don't think it was a filler episode. In fact, I'm going to double down and say that this was probably one of the more important episodes in the sense that, every season of every show kind of touches on different themes, and I feel like we're going to be touching on certain particular themes that we're going to start seeing in this episode, and it's going to kind of extend throughout the entire season. So that's why I say that this episode is, well, yes, it's filler in the sense that he kind of went on a side quest. I still believe and will maintain that it is a super important episode.
Yeah, and I think that our discussion with Keith kind of uncovers that, because we really get to the meat of it, the parallels between even the first and now the second episode with the first season. And you can see the important tones that were created in that season about how they're doing the same kind of setup and following the same formula here this season. So it's exciting times, and I don't think it's filler at all. There's a lot of deep play going on here. And we really get into it in this discussion about that analysis and the creatures in the cantina and just a lot of stuff that happens. And, we're going to have to call it out for everybody. We already say it, but heavy spoilers ahead.
Yep.
Right?
If you have not watched Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 2, Chapter 10, I will tell you to pause. Don't stop. Just pause. Go watch the episode. Come back, join us, and listen to all things Mandalorian as we discuss Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 2, Chapter 10. I wonder when I'm going to screw up saying that. You know, it's bound to happen, Phil.
Yeah.
Everything
It's a mouthful, man. Like
everything
hearing you say it.
yeah, everything seems, and I love how you avoid saying that, FYI. But, you
Yeah.
know, a couple things I know that a lot of people are wondering, wait, it's Monday. You should have released a news episode yesterday. Well, you know, I'm going to put everything on the table. I had some technical difficulties with our recording equipment, with the computer. So we got, you know what? When I think about it now, that we didn't really get delayed starting the interview. We just would not stop talking. We had so much to talk about. It was a great discussion, and I didn't want to stop the talk when we were, you know, just enjoying ourselves. So, you know, it is a bit of a longer analysis, which I absolutely love. And, you know, I implore people, you know, for those of you who do come on to chat Mandalorian with us, it's you know, there is no time limit. We're just going to go until we reach the end of the episode, get all of our thoughts out, and discuss The Mandalorian. So, because the discussion took a little longer, because we had, you know, other obligations in the middle of the day, we were only able to get the Mandalorian chat recorded. So on Monday, today, you are listening to the Mandalorian review/analysis. Tuesday, you're going to get the news episode, all things news for the week. And, you know, this is a huge week for news and for things, as the console wars are really going to heat up, as both Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 are released, and I guess Series S or whatever the fuck they call it, but whatever. It is what it is. And then on Wednesday, we're going to have our featured episode, and our featured episode's going to have another guest as we talk about video games, because it is literally on release date and pre-release date for the new console generations. I figure we're going to take a retrospective look into the previous generation. So we're going to take a look at PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and we're going to give you our best and worst, and we're just going to talk about kind of what that particular console war meant, what we think is going to come in the future. And I swear to God, if we say ray tracing once that episode, I'm going to take a shot for every time we actually do say it.
Yeah, it's become the buzzword of the internet. Well, that, and I guess the PS5's controller. But yeah, it's going to be exciting times. Unfortunately, today we hit that wall where we all had other commitments that we had to meet up, basically fulfill. So we couldn't do all the episodes that we wanted, but that's okay. You know what? If there's anything I know about the It's Canon podcast audience, it's that everybody is pretty darn patient and understanding. So I have no concerns there.
Exactly. So again, thank you, and sorry for the delays, but you know, real life happens sometimes, so it is what it is there. But without further ado, here it is, Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 2, Chapter 10, Analysis and Review.
Okay, here we are on the It's Canon podcast, and we are joined by all of the crew, really. We've got Boris here, we've got Tyler, and we have a special guest to discuss the next episode in The Mandalorian, the second one, which would be episode 10. We have Keith Kappel here.
Hey guys,
Keith?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you. I know that you've got a little bit of a distinguished resume when it comes to the content in Star Wars. I was quite happy to read your profile and see what you've kind of gotten up to in your career. I know you're very prolific in the role-playing game writing circles, and you seem to have done some work in the Star Wars end of things. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. That's very nice to say. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be a writer on Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars RPG. They have the 3 game lines, Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. And while I've done other work for Fantasy Flight as well on other game lines like Legend of the Five Rings, which is a samurai game, which, as you can imagine, shares a lot of themes with Star Wars. and Genesis as well, which is sort of their generic. Star Wars is mostly what I've done for them. I want to say it's been like 16 or 18 Star Wars books that I've contributed to as one of the half a dozen writers or however many it might have been on that book. So a lot of Star Wars canon and lore that I've been steeped in for many years now.
Well, canon is what we're all about here on the It's Canon podcast. So thank you for that lovely segue, I gotta say. And I assume everybody here has watched the second episode of this season's Mandalorian. Is that correct, Boris,
Yuppers.
Tyler?
You know it.
Correct.
Wait, I was supposed to watch what?
Well, we're going to get into it. So everybody be warned, spoilers ahead. I know it's that time. I think this week we saw a lot of spoilers going out a lot more early than last week with the Timothy Olyphant reveal in the Mandalorian in Boba Fett armor and whatnot and the events of that episode. But this week's episode is called The Passenger. And essentially it opens with the bandits setting a trap for Mandalorian. So we really get a pickup from the last episode, battling the Krayt Dragon. And then we're going right into Mando speeding down on the bike and a trap being set, which is probably one of the most primitive traps that you can do, but probably the most effective as far as Mandalorian's current situation and riding device, the speeder bike from Revenge of the Sith. So
it's kind of a throwback to like an Ewok trap almost, right? Like we saw some of these on Endor, these rope traps to take out speeder bikes. So.
Yeah, and that's exactly where my mind went. And I wasn't sure if it was correctly placed or just me searching for nostalgia. And I thought it was really interesting that the trap executed and you saw everything kind of explode. You saw everything, Baby Yoda rolling is very, very much shot so that you can notice it. And the bike exploding. But the one thing that really stood out to me was the idea that the jetpack was used so quickly by the Mandalorian, by our protagonist here. And yeah, it was really interesting to see him react in such a way to come up fighting and really eliminate the raiders that are getting him right there.
I have a couple thoughts on that jetpack specifically as well. Like, if you remember when they talk about like Rising Phoenix, I think is what his covert refers to the jetpack as, right? The armor sort of mentions that you'll be able to control it like with your thoughts, I think is kind of what the line of dialogue was. So I feel like the jetpack is a lot smarter than we may have previously believed. In other examples of Star Wars canon and lore, that there is some sort of like helmet related sort of control that's maybe reading brainwaves or something to that effect, or just like a sensor in there that could tell when you're in a crash and there's some sort of safety device. Obviously, we have cars that could automatically stop if a camera senses another vehicle. Like how in a setting like Star Wars, where there are a lot of advanced technologies, even though we don't get into like that hard sci-fi realm, I feel like we see him sort of go to his gauntlet to activate. It looks like he's activating the jetpack, but I think we could retcon it, or somebody, maybe me, will eventually retcon it to suggest that the jetpack activated automatically to sort of protect him from this unauthorized sort of sudden movement, like some sort of accelerometer or something like that. And he was just activating weapon systems maybe to use in a fight.
He mostly used it in that Force Awakens creature that was, that seemed to be the guy holding the Baby Yoda or the child hostage. He seemed to be using it in reference to him demanding that jetpack, right? And you're exactly right. I always read that Rising Phoenix thing as kind of like a discipline, where the armorer was saying to him, "Are you aware of this discipline, or have you trained in this discipline?" I think there is definitely some training that indicates to me, as a Star Wars fan, that there is some kind of relationship mentally in terms of the discipline to control it.
Like there's a lot more to it than just an on-off switch, basically.
Yeah, right? And I really do find it interesting too, just in reference to last week's episode, how Boba Fett's backpack has a missile in it. Din Djarin's doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Anyway.
And so there's different variants on that. And I just really like the magnetic seal that they revealed as well, which we all knew was there, but it was our first time really seeing it in that light, I think.
Like being physically attached and detached and all that. And just that it will stand up on its own to me was for some reason fascinating, that he could set it down and it won't just like keel over. Yeah, and with regards to the missile, like there was a moment where I'm like, oh my god, he's giving away his jetpack, but it's so cool and we just got it. And I was thinking like maybe it's an opportunity for an upgrade. They want to give him the missile. We know he has Boba Fett's jetpack, so I was thinking like, oh, he's gonna have a missile now, and that'll be great. But it was even better. What they chose to do, I thought, was even more fun.
Did anyone notice there was a really subtle play beat in there for me? That was the guy holding the child hostage looked at the Boba Fett armor and chose to go after that set of armor that Din Djarin had instead, like to demand that piece out of it. It's like, does he know something about that Boba Fett armor? Like it's cursed, or Boba Fett's going to come and mess you up or something like that? Because they're all natives of Tatooine, right? They're all supposedly, because you have to really wonder, these guys setting such a specific trap. Do they know
So
about
the little guy's
Mandalorian?
name, though, Scrapjaw Motito, if you were wondering,
Okay.
from Force Awakens. I don't know if it's the same guy or the same species,
Or the same race, right?
or just the same armor or whatever. I kind of read him as a Jawa, the way he talked and everything. I thought like, oh man, imagine you're in an RPG campaign and you were playing a Jawa. This is like the upgraded armor your character would want to have, right? Because it looks like a badass Jawa, you know what I mean? So I sort of read him as Jawa. I'm sure he's not, but we definitely do see a guy that looks identical to this in The Force Awakens, which would be like 20 years later, 25 years later, something like that.
And that would be on Jakku, right? Because he was interacting
a different
with Daisy
desert
Ridley.
planet. Right.
But it just makes me think, because the Hutts are now gone in this. And I know that the one race, which, forgive me, you might know, Keith. The one race, the one that kind of looks like a Transdojan or whatever.
The Nikto?
Bosk. Yeah, because they took over for Jabba.
Oh,
in Canon. That race, there was a crime syndicate that took over the vacuum of Jabba being gone.
yeah, that was like the Lady Valerian, the Whippet or something. And like the old Canon was like a competing crime boss in the neighborhood. And then there's like Black Sun, and there's certainly Crimson Dawn, right? Darth Maul's group. So there's all these like weird competing crime interests.
I just have to wonder if they're part of that, like part of the vacuum that's created on Tatooine, and they're hunting, because they're very specific about getting their hands on the child.
Yeah, to me it read as like there are more mercenaries being sent by the Moff and the Imperial Remnant to locate this child, right? And they're one of the groups that's like been alerted and is on the lookout. Maybe they're local to Tatooine. Obviously, there's a Nikto there that was the Nikto were used heavily by Jabba and his group, but they're general scum too, stand-ins, right? So like they could have traveled there specifically thinking they'd find this guy, or maybe they were just local and looking to trap anything, but recognized it right away. It's hard to say. They don't tend to give us a lot of context. They tend to leave, just in general in The Mandalorian, right? They leave a lot of stuff open for us to obsess about on shows like this.
Yeah, and then they mine it later in a lot of cases, right? Like we're gonna find out coming up. And anybody else with some observations? Be like, we're even deep diving this far, and we haven't even had the opening credits.
I just want to flag that Mandalorian makes that deal. Like he makes a deal with the other party and breaks it by taking. That is a motif for the episode, is keeping or breaking your deals. And I have talked to some other people who are speculating that that's going to be this big theme for the entire season, leading up to what is the true Mandalorian code honor system climax at the end of the season, with our bald probably Boba Fett from the end of the first episode.
100%. I think they're building towards something like that, right? Because Dave Filoni, who's one of the executive producers on the show, he's directed episodes. He played an X-Wing pilot in this episode, again, reprising his role. But he knows the gap between how they're presenting this particular Mandalorian and his covert and how he himself has presented them in both the Clone Wars cartoons and the Rebels cartoons, right? Where they're not afraid to take off their helmets. There's a lot of these cultural taboos aren't present there, but this is a separate sort of covert that seems maybe more radicalized or more almost like religious extremists, right? And we know Boba Fett isn't like that either, or at least he wasn't raised like that, because Jango wasn't like that in Episode 2. Some sources say they're not Mandalorians at all. I think that's the current canon on it. But obviously all that's in flux till you see it in a source, not necessarily Pablo tweeting it, right? Pablo can change his mind on a tweet. It's harder once it's in an episode.
Yeah, I think that's retcon city right there.
Right. So, like, we'll see what they decide to do. But to me, it feels like we have this pragmatic sort of atheist force in Boba Fett and this like religious extremist force in Din Djarin, and they're inevitably going to collide at some point, right? That's what we're setting up. So I think that's going to be interesting to see what happens. Does it sort of deprogram the Mandalorian, where he moves away from the way his covert does things, or is he going to convert Boba Fett and teach him some of the true Mandalorian way, quote unquote? But I think they're definitely setting up like how important is it to follow this code. I think you're right.
Yeah, and just to highlight Tyler's point as well, I'm just now thinking about that. And even in the first episode of the season, we had him striking the deal with the Marshal, right? Like that was new for this season, where he's just like, okay, yeah, all right, like let's work this out then, and we don't have to necessarily have this showdown, this fight. And obviously it crops up later in this episode as well. So finally we get the credits and whatnot.
Oh no, I have one more observation.
Oh, sure.
Like one little logistical thing that occurred to me as I was rewatching it right before earlier today. He walks into town with this stuff on his back, and the whole time I'm thinking like, bro, you got a jetpack. Like,
yeah,
we just spent like a whole minute and a half watching you use a jet. Why don't you just fly into town? So I understand there's like a cinematic, like, oh, this long trudge and it's nightfall now into town. But part of me was just like, why didn't we just skip that entirely, or like use the jetpack, bro?
Yeah, on that, I wondered, because like you said, in Clone Wars, they're whipping around in the jetpacks and they are like, I can do anything.
Right. Even in season 1 of The Mandalorian, when he looks out the window of the Razor Crest, he's like, I got to get one of those. Like, dude's flying like with him toward orbit.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, exactly. And maybe he's not as well trained, because we also look at Boba Fett and him use it more similarly, where it's like you're jumping more than anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair. Like, it could be a training thing. It could be. I mean, there's reasons they could invent, right? Like, oh, it was almost out of fuel or something like that. But
my mind was going there because it quite literally picks up at the end of the Marshall episode. So I'm just wondering with how much use he's been getting out of it.
He literally had a second one though too. Yeah. Like, he literally had Boba Fett's there as well. Like, I don't know. It's just, and maybe that one was out of it or broken because Han Solo bashed it with a
and even he did that little push on it to get Timothy Olyphant.
Right. They referenced that, right? Like, the jetpacks are maybe a little fragile, but
yeah.
Sorry, that was my last.
Oh no, and my observation as well for this episode is in the last episode we saw them use the IMAX cameras on the big action scenes. I did take a quick advanced scroll through the episode, and they never once broke into that wider angle. So the whole episode is shot with the wide letterbox bars. So I'm gonna find that that's a very interesting thing to keep my eye on as a beat during the season. So it's something that to me is a very telling thing from the visual storytelling that they're doing. So yeah. So Boris, you have anything?
Yeah.
Point,
basically, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right.
You're
so
there,
one of the main themes that I kind of saw throughout the episode was kind of like fatherhood. We're kind of seeing our friendly Mandalorian kind of and Baby Yoda, the child, kind of continue this bond. I feel like the child is kind of creating its own character. I know we're going to talk about it, but, the whole episode trying to eat the eggs, trying to kind of be mischievous like a child. It kind of reminds me of the type of relationship that Rocket and Groot have. But it's kind of like this fatherly type of relationship that they're having. And I think hand in hand with kind of making deals and seeing what the Mandalorian and what the Creed and what all of this is about. I kind of feel like, you know, he's kind of now exploring the universe, shaping his thoughts, and I think we're going to really see a lot of you know, changes throughout this season with you know, our lead protagonist.
Yeah, and this opening scene actually did start to really illustrate the bond between the child and the Mandalorian, like the way that it really moves towards Din Djarin. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of stuff there where your heart is like a little bit like, oh, they've got that bond. And he's more mobile, the child, in this season so far than he has been really in anything of the first season. In the first season, he really was a puppet in a pram.
Yeah, he really was.
This one, he's actually moving. Like he's actually
more money, man.
Yeah. New toys.
CG, component. Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot
or
of
they
fun.
might have just built something under it that'll let it roll and sort of wobble as it does.
Yeah, and you know what? They're masters. It's Lucasfilm. Like the tell signs are never going to be there because I was carefully looking at the tracks, just wondering, am I going to see little Yoda feet or is it? It was just mostly drag marks and whatnot.
Right.
But
At some point, we got to get the troglodyte tracks. In the snow, it would have been nice, right?
yeah,
Even though it's
exactly.
weird that there's fresh powder inside a cave system, but you know that's okay.
Details. Come
You
on.
know, we're going for a feeling.
It's okay. It's okay. Might have tumbled in from an, you know. I'm sure we can invent a reason, but
So we have the Mandalorian heading back in now to the to Mos Eisley, and meeting up with the mechanic, and she's having a card game with Dr. Mandible, who I was saying earlier was in episode 5 last year. He was in the background along with our little future passenger. Was in the cantina. It was kind of nice to see the cantina again. I just feel that it's all a marketing thing to get the Lego cantina set sold.
I was literally about
I
to
feel
say
like
that.
you got to remember. I think Favreau is not quite the fan that maybe Dave Filoni is. So that's why I feel like their partnership works so well because Favreau really understands the casual Star Wars audience and what touchstones they're going to find cool and need. And Filoni sort of understands the deep cut audience and what they're going to want. So I think the cantina is one of those things that's like instantly recognizable, and you know they already have the set digitally or fully built that they could reassemble. It's like it's a cost saving thing to reuse the set anyway, right?
Oh, I get it. Like,
and who doesn't want to play in the cantina? I'm sure just as directors and actors, everybody wants to be in there, right?
Big time.
But there are so many cool Easter eggs in there, which I could list for like a while.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, like, you know, the most obvious being in the booth.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure, yeah, just being in like a booth, of course.
I think
But even the droid bartender, that's I guess it's literally EV-99 from Jabba's Palace, the droid torturer from Return of the Jedi. Like that's the job he found after, so we get EV-99 again. The R5, Skippy the Jedi droid, he's there with the mechanic, right? And then the alien, Dr. Mandible, they don't. I looked around online to see if anybody was like calling it what the species was, but there is a praying mantis species we see in A New Hope. We just sort of see part of it, like in one of the crowd shots, like crossing a street or something. And you're like, that just looks like a giant praying mantis because you know their budget back then. But it is a callback to something that existed in the Mos Eisley footage in A New Hope. And that species was sort of called the Vratix. They make Bacta, and Bacta is something they definitely referenced in season 1, right? They spray the back of the Mandalorian's head with it. The droid does, IG-11. So the Vratix are the species, like their homeworld on Thifera. They make the Bacta. They're the people who make the Bacta. So this is like a big picture sort of Star Wars thing for the canon lore nerds that like really know stuff, but that's not really ever spelled out in a movie.
Yeah.
But it, you know, it's important in the books because Bacta is a real vital resource, right?
Yeah.
So Dave Filoni certainly knows about all of this sort of stuff, and Dr. Mandible looks identical to the Vratix and the Thiferans. They just look like giant, usually black praying mantises. So it was cool to see one of those sort of moving and living and existing, and probably not cheap. which just shows you
No.
that the money they're saving using the volume is being spent. We're seeing it on camera elsewhere, right? So that, because it looks great. So that was
Yeah.
exciting. And they're also playing Sabacc, right? There's an Idiot's Array is the best hand you could get in Sabacc. So seeing an actual game of that happening post-solo was really cool.
Yeah.
And in the bar, there's also a big white shaggy creature that you might have noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the same species as Maroth from Rogue One.
Rogue One, yeah.
They're Gigarans or Gigorans, however you want to pronounce it, which is like a way old deep cut from the West End Games RPG where they got invented. And I actually did some writing not too long ago in the Dawn of Rebellion book that explored the species and added it to the Fantasy Flight Games RPG, which was fun to do.
Amazing.
So that was cool. And there, I think I had some sort of tie to Hondo Anako, was trying to sell them as rare albino Wookiee labor or something like that, knowing that that's not what they actually are, which is a very Hondo sort of thing to do. But man, like the cantina, just on the face of it, has so many cool deep cuts and references. And as we know, the way the rest of the episode is, where it's really like in a small little bottle, like you got to get them in early, I guess.
Yeah.
It's funny though too with Dr. Mandible. It kind of made me laugh because the director of this episode did Ant-Man 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So
true. Also an insect reference, right?
Yeah, I was
Eating
thinking about that
Doritos.
ant playing the drums, right? And everything like that. I'm like,
That's
this
hilarious.
guy's into it.
I didn't even put that together. That's clever.
Yeah. One thing that I want to touch on, though, is something that Keith, you touched on, and that's kind of like, the partnership between Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, and that's the balance between, and it's something that I think that they've done masterfully. It's that balance between your regular audience trying to capture a new generation of people to watch this, trying to sell new subscriptions because, hey, this is new Star Wars, word of mouth, etc. And then, you have all your nods and your references and everything that, we are talking about, that we're going to be talking about, so, and I think that they've done a great job of that, because a lot of these Easter eggs, they're just that, they're Easter eggs in the background. It's not really too in your face, but it's giving us, look, we're already on 24 minutes of talking about this, and we're in the first 5 minutes of the show. So, for me, that just shows you that they're doing such a great job of kind of marrying, the new fans and the old fans, and giving us both something that we can enjoy and talk about.
And Tyler knows this because he's sort of worked in this IP writing industry as well, right? Like, it's an extra step of effort to reference something like that. And so I think a lot of people who do it in film or in books or whatever it is you're creating, right? There's like this desire to sort of like, well, give it as much time as you can to fully explain it and all that. And Dave Filoni and Favreau are smart in that they don't. They just like, it's there. We're not really going to spend time telling you about it. We're just going to move on. They didn't even say, hey, this is Boba Fett's armor.
Yeah.
There could have easily been a line, last episode, there could have easily been a line of dialogue in there. It's like, oh my God, this armor belonged to Boba Fett. It's famous armor or whatever. And they didn't do that. They assumed, you know what, you're going to know, or you're going to find out.
That's exactly, and I kind of appreciate that a little more, because it always makes me laugh, like when they throw in a line like, "Oh, let me explain this really fast for you." It kind of takes you out of it, especially if you do know, and if you don't know, I'm captivated. I want to keep watching. I want to, keep spending my time in this universe. So I think they're just doing a great job of kind of finding that middle ground for old and new fans.
100%. I think some of that comes from George Lucas too, in Filoni's sort of tutelage under him, because Lucas is famous for packing the background with like just interesting things that he's just not going to spend time explaining or doing any of that with, right?
Exactly.
Whereas maybe someone like Favreau, who's a more casual fan, is going to want to be like, no, we have to tell everybody, we have to make sure. And Filoni's probably like, no, George would say don't.
Yeah, and it also gives the casual fan, when they find out there's deeper cuts in some of the stuff, it gives them an opportunity to go revisit or watch for the first time
Sure.
Star Wars. But she catches the hype of the Mandalorian. she starts watching it, and then she's like, I gotta ask Uncle Phil, like, what the hell is this and what the hell is that? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, here you go, kid.
Yeah.
Here's the keys to the car. Go have fun, play in the Star Wars universe, and you're gonna get an experience.
Yep, that's
understanding
exactly it. I love it for
Yeah.
for that very reason. It just adds so much to it. It brings families together.
that.
Baby Yoda giving uncles and nieces something to bond over since
Exactly.
2019.
And now we have the toys. So we basically set up the introduction now for this lizard lady, who
Frog
apparently
lady, yeah.
has information on other Mandalorians, which ironically is in the system, and transport is needed, as they cook the meat on the pod racer engine. Very Disney-esque.
And also a thing I guess is physically present in the Galaxy's Edge theme park.
Yes. Yeah, that's what my reference was, very Disney, because they do that as a cooking mechanism in the Galaxy's Edge experience. So we've got that whole setup again with those deep nods, and just the idea that there's conditions on this transportation. He's got to transport the passenger, hence the title. He's got to transport the passenger's stuff, which is the eggs, and the key to this whole thing is we can't go into light speed. And the funny thing is that when you see the lizard lady going onto the Razor Crest, if you watch in the background, the child is chasing enthusiastically after the eggs.
Yep.
Sure.
Like, he's like right up on that, like, oh yeah, I want to get with these eggs. Right?
There's like that moment, right? That shot where you could see his eyes, the child's eyes lighting up at the eggs, like they just saw like a golden like idol or something like that. Like they're very interested from the word, like, I'm gonna eat that.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that if you watch the first trailer, you can see that the eggs are present in that ocean world that they go to, which is obviously going to be next episode. So Hawkeye's out there. Take a look at the trailer situation. And I think, you're going to find that most of that trailer was exactly what I was thinking it was. The first 3 episodes of The Mandalorian were heavily cut from that. And goodness knows what the heck we're in for the rest of these episodes once we get past that, as far as content. So
we also get our first Appa of the episode, because the person who voices the frog also voiced Appa from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yep.
Nice.
Was it the Frog Lady? I thought that was the actor that plays the other X-Wing pilot.
No, there's 2 Appas.
Oh.
Yeah, then he's Appa from Kim's Convenience.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah. It's the episode of 2 Appas. Yeah. D. Bradley Baker voiced the Frog Lady.
Also, I didn't know it was him.
Appa.
He also voices like all the clones in the Clone Wars. Like him and Dave Filoni are bros. So.
Yeah, sorry, it's acted by the person who did Queel last season. That's the person in the costume.
The person
in
sure.
Doing the body work.
It's awesome.
So lots of callbacks and whatnot.
Frog Lady species itself is kind of interesting because we never get told what the species is, and this character apparently was wandering in the background somewhere in season 1
episode
as
5.
well.
Yeah, episode 5 in the cantina.
So probably looking for a ride, right? Probably been looking for a ride.
Yeah.
Because as we all know, everyone on Tatooine goes to that cantina to find pilots, right? That's where the best ones in the galaxy are, according to Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Exactly.
Listen to Obi-Wan, you must. So, but her species is interesting because it's this aquatic frog-like species of which we've seen a couple in the Star Wars movies and stuff like that. And her face bears a striking resemblance to the Force nuns in The Last Jedi. Her face is almost identical, not quite. The big difference is the legs. Those guys have like the nuns have really bird-like, thin, skinny legs, and she obviously has legs that can propel her to jump like a frog. So I don't think they're the same species, but they could be related. And the other thing I draw a connection to, just because of stuff I've worked on, is there's a race called the Drabatans that were introduced in Rogue One, the frog guy with the giant mouth. And we've never seen a female one. Pau's really the only Drabatan we've ever seen. But when I was creating like their lore, and because I was one of the first writers to get to sort of expand on what they do for an RPG, and there hadn't really been anything written about it. It was cool. We got like this big secret packet from LFL about information ahead of Rogue One's release to write the book, and there just wasn't much. There was like 3 sentences of lines about the Drabatans. And one of the things I said was like they lay little eggs. They lay a bunch of eggs in like a pond, and tadpoles hatch, and that's sort of their life cycle, right? Because they're frogs. And so it seems like we're getting something sort of similar life cycle wise here. There's a bunch of unfertilized eggs. She's trying to go somewhere with the right water conditions to actually like leave them in the water to hatch, but they have to be fertilized first, obviously, by the husband. They're unfertilized eggs, so we don't have to get too angry about the child chomping on some of them, right? Same as eating a chicken egg that's unfertilized, right? Allegedly. But,
Now, if you watch the trailer for the first trailer, you'll see the husband from the back. He's quite a bit taller and he's green from the looks of it.
okay.
So,
So
it's like a aqua green. It's almost like your shirt that you're wearing now.
I'm going to have to go back and look because I'm very curious if maybe they're Drabans, or they're related somehow between some of and the females and males just look drastically different, which is not unprecedented. Like Gungans have 2 obviously very different sort of morphologies, but they're the same species, right? So I'll be curious to see what they do with that next week. Although they did say in the episode that Trask is the only world where they can sort of lay these eggs, right? The only places where the environment is right. So based on that alone, like probably not the Drabatans, unless we're going to take that to mean the only place nearby, right?
I just think they watched a lot of those Geico commercials.
And another interesting point comes up in the dialogue in this scene about the Mandalorian's covert. I listened to your guys' episode last week, and you sort of questioned, like, is he just looking for any Mandalorian or a specific one? And here we sort of, the Mandalorian asks if they were the ones from his planet before, right? So that sort of tells us he's specifically looking for survivors.
Navarros.
Of the Navarro covert, right? He's looking specifically for survivors, which also suggests that Tatooine is maybe geographically close by to Navarro, right? Like this would be a place they would come.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as well, because of that first trailer, we know that we might see Sabine there. We just don't know if that's her. Right? So
I'm down to see Sabine for sure.
Yeah. So is that the Mandalorian that the frog people are referencing? Right?
Right.
So
or her people, like there's a lot of possibilities, right? And we don't we know Katie Sackhoff is reprising her role as Bo-Katan as well, which is interesting. So I'm very excited to see where they go and how quickly they get there, right?
Yeah. It's gonna be bat crap insane. But I know this episode gets panned on the internet so far as being filler, but I think we're already displaying the fact that I don't think it's very filler. There's a lot of stuff, character stuff happening here, and there's a lot of deep cuts as far as the canon of it, as we're finding out here.
It would be it would be a filler episode.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it would be a filler for someone who watches the episode not really knowing much of the Star Wars lore. One of those quote unquote newer viewers. I can see it like they say, we're on our mission. We have to stop by this planet, and stuff happens. So I can kind of see both sides of the argument. But no, for me, I feel like this episode was really just building that foundation for the next 2 or 3 episodes.
If you look at the second episode of season 1, the Jawa Sandcrawler episode, the egg, this feels very similar to that episode, right?
Exactly.
Like in a lot of ways. And I will admit, when season 1 was new and I was watching it one episode at a time, I was very frustrated with the bottle episodes or the filler episodes, whatever you want to call them, where it doesn't feel like we're really advancing the core plot. I was frustrated with them also in season 1. But a little while ago, just ahead of season 2, I binged all of season 1, And I loved those episodes. Like when you're seeing them all in
Mhm.
context, rapid fire, they were some of my favorites because there is interesting stuff happening. They are laying groundwork that just feels like filler. Like it's not the reek. What do they call it? The mudhorn creature. Like that comes back up again a few times. Stuff with this relationship between the child and the Mandalorian comes into play with Queel. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening in episode 2 that feels like filler in the moment, but that does come back around later. And also like it's just borrowing from like those old Wild West serial TV shows. That's like one of the prime sources for this show, right? Or influences. And that the classic Western story is a man comes to town, and then at the end, he leaves. So like they were all built as bottle episodes for those kinds of things. So I think we have to give them permission to do that for a third or half the episodes, right?
Exactly.
And just learn to enjoy it.
Yep.
And I enjoyed this one immensely. I thought it was super well executed.
Yep. I am in agreement, Tyler. You have anything?
You all have done this section with pretty heavy and well trod. I'm like, I don't have a ton to add. I guess I'm gonna continue going back to like the high level themes. If we're continuing to work in this kind of larger, there's kind of larger two set of themes that are going on throughout the show that we're seeing again here, and it's very much what is parenthood, and what does it mean to be a good parent versus a bad parent. And I think that early on it was kind of like a weird disconnect because there's a lot of like the child's requirements of like what does he eat were early on very much hand waved away. But now we're going into it, and now we're like, oh, geez. And like he said, how much are we caring versus like each one of these could be a kid.
Right.
And this other side of playing with the nature versus nurture, because we've seen the child use force choke on someone, and we've seen the child do some pretty heinous acts for reasonable reasons.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And we're building on that here of, what part of a deal is worth it, and that mirror.
Yeah, just playing off what you're saying, I think like a lot of the show is about how does having a child change your own morality and how you behave, right?
Bingo.
Because you see a few times the Mandalorian is ready to do what he normally would do and be like, look, that wasn't part of the deal. We're just going to get off this planet if we can. But then he looks over at the kid when she's giving him, the guilt trip, and he's like, oh, man, I should set a good example. Like there's clearly a moment, even though we can't see his face, we know we can extrapolate so much of this, which speaks to the weird performance that it must be for poor Pedro Pascal underneath all that armor to deliver any of that like sort of nuance through all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's doing a phenomenal job because I think we're getting a lot of emotion through someone who has no face to work with.
Nothing to give us. Just all like he's like I'm sure he took a mime class or something before this, just because all you have is body language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the funny thing is that all the rumors suggested that Pedro Pascal was really upset with not being able to take his helmet off. And I can tell you, after watching the first episode, that one scene where Timothy Olyphant just takes his helmet off and it's like, here, have a drink. It's like, that's got to be like, oh, screw this.
Yeah.
Like, and his hair is perfect. When my
which
helmet
actually
took off, I was terrible.
There's I don't know how big Star Wars fans you guys were in the 90s, the mid sort of 90s. It was kind of a small time for the fandom. But there was a series of Topps trading cards that were released, sort of like looking into all the different elements of Star Wars. And there was one, and it was like the first time as a fandom we'd ever seen this. There was one image of Boba Fett with his helmet off. And it's this alien creature, but with like white sort of slicked back hair that looks almost identical to Timothy Olyphant's hair in the episode. I thought it was a neat sort of clever little nod to a trading card that was sort of like infamous among the fandom, just because it was the first time you ever saw Boba Fett officially with the helmet off. Obviously, canon has changed since then, but
yeah. So we're gonna march it forward. So we've got him basically taking this new lizard person to Trask, the destination planet, and yeah, I did make a note here that the lizard lady looks like a caretaker from Last Jedi, and I had to rewatch Last Jedi and do some side-by-side comparisons. But
eyes are a little different.
You caught the feet.
And the feet, yeah.
Yeah, but it's still interesting nonetheless. As well, we get in the ship, we get basically the child going to those eggs. I found that this was a very interesting audio cue. Is the child's new theme, I guess. There's some new instruments and some new real evocative music that departs from the tones that we've heard in the first season. And I did forget to mention this in the first episode analysis, that I found that the music, especially with the guitar and whatnot being added, is giving the Mandalorian here a little bit of an edge. And I just find that it's really enhancing my mood while I'm watching it. It's affecting the way that I'm perceiving these interactions, because the music gets really light and the child puts his hand up to the glass and the eggs start kind of coming to it. I wasn't sure if he's using the Force here or what's going on with that egg thing.
I assume there had to be some Force going on, just because it seemed like that was a locked container at some point, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like the lock got forced and now it's easy to open and close, but
yeah, and naturally the little scamp, we basically get into a situation where, I don't know if it's at this point or not. I can't recall now, and I apologize. But we start to see, the child being very obsessed with the eggs. He's obviously not consumed one yet. But then we get basically the big scene for me. Not being a huge creature guy, but respecting the crap out of it for Star Wars and becoming appreciative of it, was basically the X-Wing scene. The X-Wing come up and we have Carson Teva and Trapper Wolf, which, basically are Paul Sun Hyundai Lee and Dave Filoni.
Appa number 2.
Yeah, and Dave reprising his role after watching Disney Gallery, he seemed to be very reluctant to even adopt this character. And it seemed to be a bet between the directors about, like a game of chicken, who's going to show up on set and actually shoot this. And I could only imagine the cajoling that had to go on with Jon Favreau to get Dave to go into this. But
I think there were so many ties between this episode and the other one he was in. It sort of made a weird sort of sense, right?
Exactly, because really it came down to, Dave Filoni's Trapper Wolf calling out the fact that he's seen the ship before.
Right.
Because that's kind of the subtext of it.
So they needed one of the three.
Yeah, so they needed one of the three, and obviously Deborah
Chow's busy.
She's doing Obi-Wan and probably consumed with that. And so he was the easiest one, I guess, to put in the cockpit.
He was already there on set, I'm guessing. So.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a fun linkage, like you're pointing out, because we also see that droid, right? Naturally the infamous droid that Mando hates.
Right.
Is kind of still laying there. The guy
from the IT crowd.
Yeah, exactly. So,
there it is. Yeah.
So we see that one there too, which obviously really highlights. I was just waiting for some of the characters that, possibly reveal that they escaped the firebomb at the end or something like that, or maybe some people escaping prison and cropping up in this episode as well. But obviously it never transpired.
And some other interesting things, though, in that really dense moment, though. Trapper Wolf, Dave Filoni's character name, is a reference to the Wolf Pack, which Plo Koon, I don't know if you guys know the story, but Plo Koon is Dave Filoni's favorite Star Wars character, ever, other than, maybe ones he's created. He loves Plo Koon so much. And when he was interviewing for the job to get the Clone Wars cartoon, he was already a massive fan, but didn't want to tell them that because he figured he'd weird him out and they wouldn't give him the job. But he had a full body Plo Koon cosplay costume in his home at that point already. He was already that big a fan. He's like, oh man, I'm really excited, but I better not tell them this because they'll never give me the job if they know I'm going to geek out over everything. Which seems a little counterintuitive maybe, but your judgment could come into question if you can't make sort of intellectual decisions, editorial decisions about something, which again, Tyler, I'm sure is very familiar with.
Yep.
being able to have that distance to like love Star Wars and work on it, or love any IP and then work on it. You have to be able to like set your nerd brain aside a little at a certain point of the process, just so that you can make the best choice for the story, even though it might cut one of your favorite references or things or something like that. But yeah, so that his character's name, Trapper Wolf, is 100% like this subtle reference to the Clone War troop called the Wolf Pack that was Plo Koon's sort of clone detachment. And I think I was looking online and somebody pointed out there's a Wolf Pack patch from the Clone Wars, like on his uniform, like somewhere, which might suggest that there's more backstory to that character than we think. Maybe he has some sort of Clone Wars history or something, right? But the other interesting like narrative point that might come up later is that Mando's owed 3 bounties worth of money from season 1. So if he's down and out and broke later, you might think like, oh, well, he can get some money from the New Republic at some point if need be, right?
Unfortunately, he'd be wanted himself, even though
Yeah.
he didn't ultimately, like, they make that distinction, right? Where they're like settling that bet or that issue, or trying to, I guess, where they're like, well, you did kind of mess up our prison. You did kind of like, we're really happy that you tried to save that guy because we have the video footage, but he's dead. Not by your hand, but you definitely were in on something bad. So get a transponder.
That is true. And transponders themselves are another thing that's explored in the old RPGs quite a bit, because it's something you want to like tweak or hide if you're a smuggler or something like that, which a lot of the games sort of explore. So it's nice to see like little mechanical tidbits like that come up from time to time.
Yeah. I know that there's deep analysis going on the markings of the TIE fighter or the X-Wings.
Sure.
You know, it says rescue on them, and there's about 7 TIE fighters emblazoned on Trapper Wolf's cockpit, which denotes that he's already A status.
Yeah,
So,
or the 7 seasons of the Clone Wars, maybe.
Yeah,
that could be both.
Yeah, and
deep cuts.
Dave Filoni is a huge Wolf fan, right? Like let's not forget Rebels. Let's not forget like all the deep cuts that, you know, he's always got that wolf shirt in his closet. I know it. So
like the 3 wolves howling at the moon, right?
Exactly.
The other really cool part about this is we are getting kind of this idea that we're starting to explore more of like, what is the actual difference between this government after the Empire and the Empire, and then what the New Order is proposing later on.
Transition government, life in the New Republic, right?
Yeah, and I get that can be pretty boring stuff, especially for like your tentpole, you know, movie, but bringing it up in these shows, I think is a great way to do it, and see like, yeah, they're just like 2 beat cops doing the rounds.
This is the thing Dave Filoni cares about, though, and we know this because he pulled out Cobb Vanth of all people from the lore, who's a character who appeared in a novel originally by Chuck Wendig, the Aftermath book, right? Which is the whole trilogy of books is like life after the Empire fell and the New Republic's trying to gain its footing. So that character was lifted wholesale out of a little interlude from the Aftermath novel. And so this is clearly like part of the era that Filoni wants to make sure is getting at least some moments to give you a sense of how the galaxy is, right? In addition to like stormtrooper helmets on pikes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's probably the most explorable time period for Disney and everybody to get into. That's going to link. It's going to be that cartilage that goes between the originals and the prequels to the sequel trilogy and whatever else they're going to create in there. You know, Star Wars Resistance comes to mind on the later part of that. You know, obviously different audience intended for it, but it had merit.
And I gotta say, you know, there's something to be said about life imitating art with, you know, this transition, the transition government, and kind of seeing what happens in between from like, you know, this, you know, the Empire to what happens after. So it's like, you know, that life imitating art, and I think that will also captivate a lot of viewers and, you know, people like us.
Yeah, it's timely too, given our current political situation in the world.
Regime changing.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have the slavers coming into town like they did in that in that Tatooine town.
It's fair. It's a real
I
concern.
So we'll move along if anybody, unless somebody has something that other insights they'd like to offer.
I just thought the chase sequence that they have
Yeah.
was,
That's moving along. Hey, that's good.
was a lot of fun. I don't know why I hadn't thought of the Razor Crest in this way the whole first season and up till now. But when I was seeing the actual, I guess the dogfight you would call it, the chase, I was reminded a lot of Firefly. It felt very Firefly to me. We're going to cut the engines, we're going to fall, and we're going to boot them back up and lose them that way.
Yeah.
And then the canyon, if you've ever played a Star Wars video game where you fly a thing, there's almost always a level where you're flying Beggar's Canyon on Tatooine, right? So that the canyon flight was very sort of, and it's just a trope in general at this point, right? But that was fun to see, and they found a sort of cool, inventive way to get out of it, to end it, that I hadn't seen before. So
I thought of the Millennium Falcon actually a lot in the sequel trilogy, because Han Solo kind of crashes it a lot and slides it.
The Razor Crest can't go 5 episodes without crashing, right?
And I was the only part that turned me off in that chase sequence was the sounds that they used on the dive bomb, which are it just felt very Looney Tunes. Like the sound was just overstated about the Razor Crest falling, and it's like, I don't know, it felt like a cartoon. That marriage, it looked good, but it sounded weird. But that's kind of like Star Wars with its
Star
wipes
Wars.
And so I let go of it pretty quick, but I did kind of cringe. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll give it a pass.
But the visuals were neat, right? We got I felt like we were in the clouds and Bespin, Cloud City, at the start of the chase, and then we end up sort of on this Hoth sort of environment once we finally land, and with the Tatooine canyons in between. So it was a weird marriage of Star Wars environments.
That is the planet that the Mandalorian opened on when he got the blue guy, when he trapped him in the first season. Remember, it was an icy planet. Apparently it's the same planet.
One.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we're talking a very
we know
close
there's
system
giant
here.
creatures.
Yeah, we know that this is a bug infested planet, and that there's civilization somewhere on it too.
Right.
There's a bar
outposts
at least,
right? That bar looks pretty isolated in the grand scheme of things when we saw the wide shot of it, right? So minimal, maybe.
Yeah, so maybe Din Djarin had some familiarity with it, where he thought, I can get out of this. Obviously the surprise was falling through and crashing the Razor Crest into that. And I know, again, watching the previews or the trailer, seeing it crash there, I assumed that was a Razor Crest because I had just put together the Lego model for the Razor Crest and I saw the markings. So I was like, this has got to be it. But there was a lot of debate on the internet, and it looked like I was a little bit scared when I saw it in this episode, because I'm like, that doesn't look recoverable. Like, I know
never, like in the second episode, the same, right? He gets fit. Like the Razor Crest feels like it gets completely taken apart frequently.
Yeah. It speaks to his skills too, because immediately, like upon waking up, he's kind of like, they're already going with this frost effect, right? Because if you monitor his time on this planet, the helmet and the armor gets frostier and frostier as it marches on.
Yeah.
And like his first thing is obviously the panic of wanting to know the child's okay, right? And he disguises that a little bit with, I'm going to go check for the eggs. Right. You stay here.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and you could tell his frantic nature was not about the cargo, the eggs, as much as it was, because for him, the deal's off. Right. That he's just like, all right, so I'm going to go take care of mine. This is that family theme, right? The father-son thing that we're talking about, the lone wolf and cub. So we got him going down there and finding him. And what's the little scamp doing? He's got his,
Snack
chompers
time
on an egg.
Just a little bit of eating someone's kids.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Potential kids, unfertilized eggs, guys.
Yeah.
Not make him more of a monster than he already is as equivalent of a 2-year-old, a toddler.
Exactly.
There is something about this egg consumption, though. If you'll notice, he never chews them.
No,
Yeah, it's
He inhales them. And he chewed the crap out of the little spider that we're going to get to. But he inhaled the eggs, all of them.
and he tried to inhale that frog from season 1,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's true. And yeah,
Didn't quite get it in, but
it's that's such a classic Star Wars moment too, right? Like,
Yeah. That's why there's so many
That-
toys of them already.
yeah, oh yeah, there's Funko Pops, you know. it's everywhere. So yeah, so we get him down there, and we get to the eventual scene that, you know, where the frog lady, you know, he goes to sleep, and it says, you know, get ready, because here's some blankets, you know, here's your kids, or here's your eggs, your unfertilized eggs and whatnot, and basically says, you know, we got to get out of here, but I'm gonna get some rest. And then she reprises that robot, the IT crowd robot.
Yep.
Which
Yeah.
I'm gonna call it that. And freaks him out a
ITC.
little bit. You know, because this is one of those things. I really appreciated the fact that she was using it as a translator.
Mhm.
And
Smart.
it really gave insight to me about the complexity of this character. That, you know, you think that she's like a dumb frog or a gecko type thing, and then here she is. She's got skills. She definitely has skills, and she does that. And I think it was just really welcome for me, because I didn't really like the way that they do this in Star Wars, and there's no other way around it. And, you know, Han Solo talking to Chewbacca in the Wookiee language, the mechanic talking to the frog lady.
it's
It
hilarious,
was
by
just
the way.
uncomfortable. It becomes funny in that you're right. It's
Yeah.
yeah. It's hard. I think it's probably easier for you with the role playing games, because that would definitely be a part of it, is, you know, in that universe,
I was going
wanting
to
to
flag that,
communicate.
actually. I was going
Yeah,
to flag
that
that. There's a great bit in the Star Wars RPG books where it's basically like language translation should only ever come up when it's important to the plot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And moments like this sort of highlight that C-3PO maybe wasn't completely as useless as we would imagine watching the original trilogy, right? Like, situations do come up where it's like, man, we could do this a lot better if we had a droid.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny though too, because Mando constantly refers to the child as if he's got a spoken relationship to him, and really they don't. Right?
No, I
Like,
think they're kind of figuring it out, right?
Yeah.
But like the
It's definitely
child starting to
progressing.
understand no. Like, we see a few sort of things that the Mandalorian says to it that the child seems to understand, even if the child ignores it completely, right?
Exactly.
Like, hey, come here, and just wanders off the other direction. Like, he knew.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Child
like a toddler.
Like when you
Like
yell at a cat and the cat's like, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that dynamic on screen. It you know, we know that from the first season, he understands, like the child understands, don't eat the frog, but yet in this episode, he really loves those unfertilized eggs, like, because he knows he's being bad.
Right.
He is mischievous as all hell in this thing. So
I've never
basically-
had kids myself, but I'm 11 years older than my youngest brother, and I remember when he was 2 and 3, and like, they're tyrants, they're little monsters, and they also will put almost anything they find in the ground in their mouth as well. So, like, it felt pretty real to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it was very real, but I think it's going to be a payoff down the road. There's going to be something, I think, a little bit further with these eggs and whatnot, but maybe not. Who knows? It's just a guess, right?
It's hard to
That's what we're
say.
all here for. So we basically get it moves along pretty quick at this point. It becomes a Star Wars thriller. It really does. This is a tonal change, where we get, you know, the Mando has to find Frog Lady, finds her kind of lounging in the pool with her eggs, a hot tub, hot spring, and naturally the child wanders off and, in a very alien-esque way, finds these pods on the ground manages to find the one that seems to be dead, right? Like that he opens it and it's not ready. It's not ready for emergence. But once he opens that thing, holy cow, Pandora's box, because all of them on cue start opening.
Yep.
And we get probably, as not a big fan of spiders myself, probably one of the most terrifying sequences that you can have as a arachnophobic person.
The Krykna, I think they are.
So I'm not sure if they. I mean, to me, yeah, I look at those and I'm like, oh, they're like snow Krykna, cold Krykna, or whatever. But they were first introduced in Rebels, right? So it's a Dave Filoni like sort of creation, sort of, because they're based off of Dagobah concept art by Ralph McQuarrie,
Right.
who made like this sort of tree species that starts out as a spider and then eventually plants roots and becomes a tree. And you see all these trees in the swamp of Dagobah with like the spider-like legs coming out of it, roots.
Yeah, the
but then
Kobe
there's a
white
big
spider, it's called.
so yeah, so it comes from there. It's a total deep cut. But we did see on the planet Adelon, which is featured heavily in Rebels, is sort of like their base for a few seasons.
Yeah.
Like they discover these spiders in the tunnels, and they're like those ones are semi like blaster proof, it would seem. But they like feed on fear. They're attracted to fear, which could be saying something subtle about the child, maybe. Is it because there's a force thing going on with these spiders? But we get a big one, right? It's another like Mandalorian verse giant creature, which seems to be a theme of the show in general. Because season 1, episode 1, the thing from under the ice tries to latch onto the ship, and he has to fight it off to escape, right? And in season 2, episode 1, the thing comes from under the sand, and he has to, go and blow up the crate dragon. And then in
he
season
uses
2,
the same gun, right? He electrocutes it in both of those parallels.
And then in season 2, it's the same thing. It's a creature in a cave, and we're dealing with eggs. So like, there's a lot of like parallel sort of circular stuff happening in the construction of the season, which might just be fun for Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, or it might be like a hint to where things are going and where else can you look for structure like that to sort of mimic and parody itself.
Yeah, for sure. And what were those spiders called from Rebels?
Krykna.
There we go.
Like Kryka, something like that.
Kana.
Nice.
Kana. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So I actually had to write about them as well. Dawn of Rebellion sourcebook was like our Rebels sourcebook for the RPG, and Dave Filoni wrote a really nice foreword for the book and everything. And that's where this episode just weirdly has a lot of connections to that book that I worked on a few years back, long before The Mandalorian was more than, I'm sure, loose conversations at Lucasfilm, which I would in no way whatsoever be involved in, obviously. It's a lowly freelancer. But there's just a lot of cool connections of Dave drawing on his own work from Rebels and the Clone Wars, and that's stuff that we had to explore pretty heavily for that book.
Yeah, it's not coincidence.
Right.
That hallmark is there because the Kobe white spider that everybody seems to really lean on in the internet world is not really, there's nothing more about it. You know what I mean? And this, I think, fits the context of what we're talking about, and maybe the motives of these spiders and whatnot, because they feed on fear, because they, it's consistent with what the storytelling is that's already there, that Dave's explored and wants to explore further in a cinematic way, right?
And created, right? So it's not like he doesn't know this stuff, or like he would have to do research to know this stuff. This is stuff he made up. So he's intimately familiar with what they are, what they do, how they work, and what the intent was when he was putting them in the earlier episodes as well. So the fact that they're in tunnels near water, like on the planet Adelon, which is the big coral reef sort of planet, where coral reef is on a desert world standing up like trees. And they're in these subterranean tunnels feeding on little snail guys. Here, we're not seeing what they're feeding on, presumably something down there, but our heroes are there to be a potential snack, right? And we get one giant big one, which is fun.
Yeah, and they look pretty hungry. I gotta say, they look pretty hungry. So, and
they looked awesome. Like, it's rare to see something make the transition from animation to live action like that. I don't think it just happens that often. And it was, to me, it was really interesting to see how he envisioned them looking as a more live action looking creature.
It's similar to, I guess, episode chapter 3 with the Loth Cat.
Yeah, same thing.
You know what
right?
I mean? Like that was a big moment for me because I'm like, well, here's something that I see almost regularly in Rebels, which I invested heavily in.
Just
I
great show.
just
It's a great show.
I just tuned out the world and was like, this is where I'm going. Like this is my Star Wars. Like this is my jam. So the Loth Cat and that, and then seeing it in the physical world was really eye opening for me, and I just it got me a little bit in the feels. So
And the Loth
this
Cat was
is
a little jarring. I didn't expect its head to be quite so large and spherical.
yeah.
In
was-
like
it was
that felt
literal.
like creative license, right? But it was like, no. They have giant Pac-Man heads, and get ready for it. But
Exactly. It was almost too literal, right?
yeah. But this
Uh.
one, I feel like they did an amazing job, sort of converting it to
Yeah.
a live action thing. Because if you'd never seen the cartoon, I don't think you would think they looked odd. Whereas if you look at the Loth Cat, you might be like, that's a weird looking thing, but cute.
And it's definite that they modeled it after Ralph McQuarrie's, that live action look. Like at no point in this thing's life could I see it becoming a tree. So, that's my argument about that, because I'm like, it definitely wasn't that what everybody's sourcing as the source material just for looks. And it's a terrifying creature, right? With that mandible thing coming out
maw,
with the teeth.
yeah.
It almost reminds you of the creatures from Empire Strikes Back. Oh,
The
my
Minoc,
God.
sure.
The Minoc,
that had
yeah.
sort of bleaching on the cockpit window. It's
Yeah.
definitely like a temporary callback. And they did such a great job with like the subtle effects. When the thing puts its mouth on there, like the glass fogs up because the top breath comes out. Like such cool little attention to like just detail to make it all feel real, right?
Yeah. And what a sequence, leading up to that, the chase, the fire, everything, right? Like
Yeah.
this thing, you could feel the tension, and you could feel like, how the hell are they going to get out of this? And then it gets worse, right? With the appearance of this giant thing. And then from out of nowhere, off screen, we just see the flash of red blasters.
And we hear it. You know
And
the
we hear
sound.
it. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. It was like one of those really, truly happy moments that this show is able to produce out of fans, where, like you see the connective tissue again, Trapper Wolf, and the same X-Wing pilots are there liberating them. And it was so hard to see with the lights as well. It was deliberately like hidden from you at first, and you're wondering what the actual hell is going on. And then
I'm sure a lot of people are like, Boba Fett? Where? Because like, who else would be following this guy, right? Like, what?
And they're all crack shots, which you have to wonder, is it like slight dig at like how bad stormtroopers were?
yeah.
True, right? With the rifles. Although, like, definitely they were firing the X-Wing laser cannons first at the big one. That's what put down the big. Like, you could hear the noise change, right?
Yeah. And some of those spiders were pretty bloody tiny. Like, you know what I mean? And Dave
Fresh hatchlings, man.
Yeah. It's amazing. Paul Lee just taking them out. And yeah, and then we basically see Mando repair the ship enough, tell them that we can't, we have to be in the cockpit. The hull's basically breached. So here we go. And they throttle off and somehow manage to get atmosphere. And it leaves us exactly again where the trailer 1 shows us going over the gas giant with the damaged Razor Crest. And 2, the destination world Trask. So yeah, I can see how this all knits together. I can see, the continuity that Dave and John are really achieving this season, and the storytelling, and how it's going to be a great continuous watch through when it's all, finally in our possession to binge and obsessive even more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's basically the play-by-play. Do we have any final thoughts, everybody? I give you the floor.
I thought it was really interesting, the conversation between the Mandalorian and the Rebel pilots, or the New Republic pilots, reach this sort of understanding, right? This is something definitely drawn from Westerns, right? Where the outlaw and the lawman sort of come to an understanding in the interest of a greater good of some kind, right?
And this
Mhm.
is now the second example of that in this season, right? So it's like, our outlaw is constantly going out, making friends, kind of going against what we would assume would be his natural tendencies. So, it's just interesting that in the first two episodes, it's like he does this team up, so to speak.
Right. So
Yeah.
in season 1, certainly we see him do something similar with Queel and Cara Dune,
Yeah.
and like he makes these friends, and then we're going to get everybody together in the finale to help him achieve something larger than he can on his own, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, making friends is it seems to be a theme of the show, right? Even in these allegedly like bottled episodes that don't feel like they're contributing to the plot, like those X-wing pilots might come back again at some point this season as necessary allies for a problem that comes up. And the other thing I'd just like to say in an act of self-serving promotion is that, like, if you've never played the Star Wars RPG before, the Edge of the Empire Star Wars line is basically this show. Like, this is what the game is designed to give you the experience of. So if you've never tried a tabletop RPG before, Edge of the Empire Beginner Box is not that difficult to find. It gives you everything you need. If you've never played, it sort of gives you a play-by-play and explains how to run the game for yourself and either your kids or a couple friends or whatever. And it's a real fun interactive storytelling game, improvisational storytelling game. So if you like The Mandalorian, you should try Edge of the Empire.
Even on Discord, there's a lot of
Right.
people doing online gaming. Like we're recording this episode on Discord, and there's nothing that says that you can't enjoy these RPGs, right? Like this is a huge thing for the sweaty Star Wars geeks to be
We
able
love
to
it.
live in that world, right? And to go beyond just being a cosplayer or whatever, but actually being able to express yourself and experience the world firsthand.
Yeah.
Tyler's like up to speed on this stuff too.
I was gonna weigh in, since I have a couple of the books on my RPG shelf back there. So it's not just Keith saying, "Oh, this thing I worked on is great." I haven't worked on it, and I do have to say one of the things that it does bananas well. Like one of the best times I've ever seen an RPG do this is how well it feels like Star Wars from the jump. It has a unique dice system, and like the way that they have of failing forward.
Sure.
It's maximum Star Wars. It's so easy to be like, you roll it and you're like, oh geez, and you botch the roll, and that's the time where you're Han Solo being like, we're fine. How are you?
Or your Luke Skywalker blast the bridge controls, or blast the blast door controls, and like, oh, now the bridge doesn't work, so now we have to swing across.
Yeah,
It'd
exactly.
be like succeeding at one thing, but it's screwing up the next thing, or failing at one thing that's helping the next thing. That Star Wars sort of making it up as you go along feel, right? I love the game. That's all Jay Little's design. He also designed the X-Wing miniatures game, so he's a legend and a giant. It's got like some billion-dollar games to his name or whatever. Real smart, creative guy, and I'm just lucky enough to like expand and work on the system after that part got done. But
I'm curious about part of that process. I know I asked Jim Zub this as a creative
who
author.
I met once or twice. He's a super nice guy.
He really is.
He was on the show, and we discussed his upcoming book, which delves into the canon side of Empire Strikes Back. It's got a short story where he's writing Yoda.
How fun!
Yeah, like what a treat that is. I've got mine on pre-order, so we're gonna have him doing that. But I asked him about the canon process from his point of view, and he said that he would basically submit the story, and then it would go through like 3 different people at Lucasfilm, where they'd almost answer their own questions. They'd put on the liner notes or on the notes of the document or the story. They'd say stuff like, "Oh, can this happen?" And then the next person goes in and says, "Oh yeah, it's totally open to do that because of this situation."
Mm-hmm.
Like Yoda would have, whatever the clarity is, then they're almost answering their own stuff. So he's like, well, as a writer, I'm getting, okay, this is a green light then. I can have the character do that. Do you have any restrictions like that when you're creating in the universe? Like, is there stuff that has to go for approval or at least once over
So
from Lucasfilm?
Absolutely. First of all, the Lucasfilm Story Group, which is the people, it's Pablo and Leland Chi and Matt Martin and a whole office full of wonderful people who update their internal holocron, and they also, it's not just Wikipedia, but better. They know what's going to happen. They know what's in production and all this other stuff. They also have access to Wikipedia, right? So those people go through everything, and that includes all the stuff that I work on. So yeah, we have to deal with that part of the process as well. Now, as a freelance writer, I don't see a ton of it because my boss, Sam Gregor Stewart, he does a lot of that interfacing as one of the sort of in-house people. He's the RPG managing editor at FFG and now at Edge Studio, which is where all these games have moved, sort of like an internal reshuffling. But so he deals a lot with a lot of the back and forth more so than me.
Right.
But I do see some of it, right? Like for some projects like the Rogue One / Rebels book, Dawn of Rebellion, like that one, we were working on it before the movie came out. So LFL was giving us like some advanced materials to be able to do the job, right? And everything we do right gets sent to them at the final draft stage, at the outline stage, the mid-draft stage, and the final draft stage, I want to say, for notes and approval. And sometimes those get filtered through my boss, Sam, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes I get them just in line in the comments of my Microsoft Word manuscript or whatever.
Right.
And I could see specifically what, Pablo or whoever might have said about a thing. And because I'm such a fan, and as you can see, this is just the Star Wars books behind me in these shelves here. Like my other books are far over there and elsewhere in the house. The Star Wars stuff has to stay close, though. But so I'm pretty well versed in the lore, so I'm probably not going to make a mistake about old lore because that's researchable anyway, and I'm just really familiar. But there's stuff coming out that I don't know about. So I know certainly in Friends Like These, which is an adventure module I wrote that features Mandalorians really heavily a few years back. For that, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff, and obviously I didn't know about the Mandalorian. I didn't know some of the planets that I tried to use in that book were being used somewhere else in a very different way in a novel in development that I had no way to know about. So things get changed. You get kicked back, and they're like, "Well, we can't do this. It's already spoken for." But maybe they'll suggest something else. Or often LFL will just say, like, "Make up your own. Make up something new that we could play with." They seem to prefer that a lot of times to just getting circular referencing old canon. So they like more of a mix, right?
Expand the universe, right?
But do I ever feel like handcuffed or hemmed in? Absolutely not. I feel like every crazy thing I try to do, I always, like almost every job I have, I'm like, man, I'm going to put this in here just to see where the line is. Like I'm waiting for them to say like, no, that's not Star Wars. You're not allowed. You can't reference, the holiday special. You can't reference, I'm waiting for something to be like, that's not referenceable. Now the Mandalorian, of course, has showed us that, like, of course the holiday special is something you could reference. Like the whole character is like a walking holiday special reference. So like, no, there is nothing out of bounds really. So every time I try to find where the line is and do something nuts, it comes back approved and it makes it to print. And I'm like, oh my God, like where is the line? I'm going to have to go crazier in the next job and see if I find it. So I'm always constantly trying to push the boundary and find the line, and I've yet to find it. So I don't feel restrained in any way, shape, or form. But also, like, I'm not trying to write a book where like Luke Skywalker does something weird. Like that's outside the context of what RPG books usually do. We don't deal with characters that often. We deal with bigger picture things, locations like planets, planet histories, species, equipment, weapons, starships, stuff like that. Most of the characters we feature are ones we create on our own because you don't want too much like contamination of that canon timeline of certain characters. You also don't want the galaxy to start feeling small, where like Boba Fett is everywhere. Like some people will complain Tatooine gets featured so often in so many things, including the Mandalorian. So you want to push back against that feeling that the galaxy is a much smaller place than it really is.
I think it's got to be one of the most visited planets.
Because it's an instant touchstone, right? People see all that sand and the two suns, and they know they're not in Arizona. They know this is Tatooine. This is Star Wars. When I was a little kid, my dad used to drive us from Chicago to Indiana for the summers. We had some sort of summer like home thing out there when I was really little. And we go past this rock quarry just outside of Chicago, and we just called it Star Wars. We didn't even call it Tatooine or the sand. We just called it Star Wars because it looked like the Junlin Wastes. It was this big sort of rock quarry dug out on either side of the highway, and it was a highlight of the drive every summer there and back as like a 7-year-old or whatever. So like it's an iconic location that you instantly recognize as Star Wars.
Yeah.
So they feature it because it's shorthand for letting the audience know this is where we are.
Yep. And like Claudia Gray canonized Harloff Minor. It goes to prove that with Christian Harloff getting his name canonized in Star Wars. It just shows you that you're exactly right, that come up with your own. You need to explore that one, my friend. Make it a gas giant.
Oh, that's a good one.
Sorry, that was my sweaty.
We get to do a lot of stuff like that. In the Friends Like These adventure, we have a location called Vlemeth Port. And it was, I challenged myself to find like the most obscure reference I could. And it's in like a GM screen table from 1987 from West End Games. There's like a table of planets you could go to trade, mercantile goods or, whatever nonsense. And one of them was Vlemeth Port. And I'm like, I'm going to make that a location and blow it up and do a whole chapter in this book on it. Because you just need a name. Sometimes you just need a name for a thing. And it's easier to find one than it is to make up a new one, because naming things is hard, as Tyler knows, I'm sure.
Naming things is a pain.
It's like a whole, after you've written your whole thing, I have to go back and fill all the placeholders for all the damn names of things.
Yeah. It is easier than having to do like what you're talking about, where it's like, I have to those rare times where they don't let you come up with your own, and you have to like thread the needle between other pieces of like established lore. It's just
the nightmare of that for me was there's a book I did called Strongholds of Resistance, and I had to do 8,000 words about the planet Mon Calamari. Mon Calamari now is what they call it. And it was at a time when sort of the killing the old canon and having a new sort of official canon was new. So it was real questionable about like what counted and what didn't. And 8,000 words, I can't just say nothing, right? Like I'm going to have to get into it. So it was a nightmare of trying to figure out what to say, what locations to talk about, what history and events to talk about. Yeah, when you have to do all that research and stuff, it could be a lot of extra work. But I think when you do the work, the due diligence, like it pays off, because there's fans who, if you nail it, they love it. If you screw it up, you're going to hear about it forever. So
totally.
There's that too.
Yeah, it is that tricky avenue. And when they'll like make something up, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, making stuff up is hard though too. Like a blank slate is almost harder than like, here's the box you could work in.
Oh,
right?
100%. This is like a middle zone. But now we're nerding out about creative processes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't want to get too far outside what we do here.
Yeah, maybe we could do that.
Created, so
yeah, maybe we can do that in another episode, because Keith, you've been absolutely fantastic. I want you to let people know where they can find you and what you're working on. So give us your deets, man. I want to know, where are you?
So
what are you doing?
The Twitter is at KR Kappel, Kappel. And I'm not on there often, but if you at me or something, I could certainly respond if you have questions. And certainly my professional work, anything I'm working on will get promoted through that Twitter, so you'll be kept apace. The place where I usually am is Facebook, which is facebook.com/Keith.Kappel. But if you go there, you're going to find all my like progressive leftist, shit posting and stuff like that. So like you're going to have to, if you don't want to deal with that is fine. Like follow my Twitter. That's just my professional page. You don't have to deal with me being myself very loudly. If you don't like that. As far as what I'm working on, I am freelancing now for Edge Studios, which has taken over the RPG licenses from Fantasy Flight Games. It's not a new company. They're both subsidiaries of Asmodee, which is this sort of broader game publishing company. I'm still working on the book. Sterling Hershey, who's worked on every edition of the Star Wars games, is still working on the books. Most of the freelancers have moved over, and that's because we have the same boss, the same managing editor, Sam Gregor Stewart, who sort of captained the ship at FFG and is doing so now for Edge. So same games, same products. I think you'll start seeing reprints eventually with like Edge Studio logos on them of the old FFG material and stuff like that. So, if you haven't played before, it's a perfect time to jump in. If you have been playing, that's where you're going to be able to find stuff. They just started their own social medias. I don't have that handy, but Edge Studio has a Twitter and a Facebook page and their own website and all that stuff. So that we should start getting a lot more information soon moving forward.
Excellent. Well, Keith Kappel, thank you so much for everything you've brought to our discussion today of the episode regarding The Mandalorian. Really appreciate all of your insight and all of your context throughout.
My long-winded pleasure.
And that was it. What an awesome discussion we had. Again, I want to thank Keith so much. It was honestly a pleasure to have Keith on the show today to discuss Mandalorian, to discuss everything that he's been working on, everything that he's has worked on, is working on, and will work on. It means a lot to have people who kind of helped shape the canon that is this the galaxy, the world, the universe of Star Wars, it means a lot to have people want to chat with little old us about something so significant in the geek world.
Yeah, that was honestly, I didn't know what we were walking into with Keith and whatnot, and he's just so well spoken, so knowledgeable. It blew me away. There were times in that interview where I'm just quite literally holding on to my hat, just hearing some of the stuff that he's recounting for us. And, even just near the end there, the policies and procedures for working with Lucasfilm. And I touched on some of that with Jim Zub, and I sadly forgot to mention the new book that's coming out this Tuesday, November 10th. And it's Star Wars Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view. So it's part 2 in that series, and we're excited for that. So I just want to make sure that Jim gets his shout out on that, along with Keith there at the end with all of his stuff. We're now following each other on Twitter, and just what a great guy. Like, honestly, I'm so excited about the possibility of either A, getting him in for another analysis, or B, just having him as a feature guest on our show and just really deconstruct some canon and Star Wars.
Exactly. It was such an awesome talk. I had a lot of fun. So Keith, thank you so much again for joining us, and I hope that we do have you soon on the show. I'm really excited, having that conversation, even though you could probably count how many words I said in that hour. It was a really great conversation. And again, going back to talking about the technical issues we were having, I was making sure that the episode was at least being recorded, because the last thing I would want to do is to waste anyone's time, more so than we sometimes had to. I think we started like 5 minutes later than we wanted to. It is what it is. Keith, thank you. Phil, you did awesome. Thank you for leading us in these discussions. And for those of you who haven't realized, Phil will be leading us in these discussions as we chat about all things Mandalorian. And then Tyler and I will kind of be your lackeys. We'll contribute when we can. But this is, I think Phil's passion project, as he is, the in-house Star Wars geek.
Yeah, and I apologize too about just the breakouts, just because I know Boris was having some heavy challenges, and the recording came through great, but we were actually struggling to hear him. So sometimes we talked over him inadvertently, because we just couldn't even register that his input was coming across, because we're in that COVID world. We're doing everything responsibly and socially distanced and over the internet. So there are the challenges there within some times, and today wasn't one of our better days, but Boris managed to pull it together. So I really have to thank him for all of his technical efforts ongoing throughout this whole process of recording a podcast. and Tyler as well. We got him in there. I think it's too bad we couldn't get more of a voice from Tyler, but at the same rate, he seemed to be quite satisfied because he seemed to be quite excited to just be observing and a part of that conversation as it was.
Exactly.
So it's a great honor, and thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to lead these shows. But yeah, it's something that I'll get better at as we go on. But yeah, and it's kind of a new thing in my portfolio to put in there, but it's a fantastic experience. So thank you.
Exactly. It's a lot of fun. You know what? For me, I kind of like taking that step back. I gotta admit, there was something to be said about actually being able to think about what I'm going to say before I say it, to actually listen to what everyone, well, not that I don't listen, but, not being on top of my toes the entire time, making sure that conversation is moving. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
We might have to explore this a little more.
Yeah, and for sure for me being in this chair driving, it's interesting because I'm also trying to appreciate and drink in everything that Keith is presenting. And it is really difficult because you're trying to project into where you're going next, and you're just reacting in your mind about, just the great information that he had about the spiders and all this stuff, and then seeing what you see on the internet and knowing that this kind of corrects that and your reaction in your own mind, right? It's like it's stuff that you can't pre-anticipate.
Yeah.
So it really is a challenging role, but definitely one that's so much fun.
Yeah, one thing I did notice was, I don't know if you noticed, I know we've said this many times, but we record each other as we podcast and discuss things, and I don't know if you noticed, Phil, but Keith had like a bunch of notes that I noticed that he kept looking at. I'm like, wow, he's more prepared than me.
Well, he showed me before the show started recording because we had about 20 minutes or so of just getting to know one another and whatnot. Yeah. And Keith showed me, he pulled up the pad and he's just like, yeah, I made notes.
Yeah.
And he was even joking with me this morning because he's like, I'm going to go rewatch the episode. And then I felt woefully unprepared. Because I'm like, I made my notes yesterday and then I found all my autocorrects and everything. So I'm like, I think I got Paul Lee's name wrong because it somehow corrected it to be Hyundai.
Yeah.
So again, my apologies to everyone listening, because you never know who is listening to our show. That's the one thing that always blows me away.
Exactly. All right. So we're going to run down what the week looks like. So today is Monday. You are listening to our Mandalorian review. Tuesday, news of the week, featuring hopefully Phil and Tyler and myself. Wednesday, we're going to have our featured episode where we are going to have a special guest, Matthew Ederer, who does a bunch of YouTube videos taking a look at retro sports games. So I figure, why not have him as we discuss, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the future consoles, and hopefully by then Best Buy can hurry up and send me the actual system, because
hey, that's retro gaming, man. That's like right in there.
Exactly. So then and then Thursday, Matthew and I don't know why I always call him Matthew, Matt and I are going to bring to you episode 3 of NXT Talk. So that's this week in the It's Canon podcast.
Is there going to be ray tracing in your Thursday?
I swear, nothing bothers me more than that word right now. Especially like as I talk with my nephew, he uses it so much. I'm like, can you just stop? Just stop. Just stop. Don't sound cool. Yeah. So there we go. So that's pretty much what the week looks like. And then we have I can't believe we're already in by the end of all of this, we'll be in middle of November, and we're just like making our way to the 12 days of Christmas, which we need to finalize and have fun, a little fun with that.
Well, something did dawn on me when we were mapping out after the show about Mandalorian. And I think we're going to be in danger of the Mandalorian episodes overlapping our 12 days of Christmas. So there's going to be a lot of It's Canon podcast in your stockings this year.
Yep. I hope everyone likes our voices because, yeah, we'll see.
Get your headphones out.
Exactly. But it's going to be fun. So I think that is it. Phil, how about you tell our awesome listeners how they can get a hold of us?
Why, certainly. Well, you can find us on our website, which is www.itscanonpodcast.com, which Boris again went through and cleaned up big time. So it's actually a really pleasant and wonderful experience, especially on your phone or mobile device. So please make sure to stop by and check out all of our information about contacting, about the show, about downloads, about everything that you can try to understand about the It's Canon Podcast. But if you're looking on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you can find us at It's Canon Podcast. You can email us at show@itscanonpodcast.com. You can subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, Amazon, really anywhere you find podcasts, you should find us. And if you don't, let us know. We'll get there. So if you like what you hear so far, make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button. And be sure to give us a rate and review. And thanks so much for supporting us and listening to our show.
That's right, because we are the It's Canon Podcast. We are the podcast that talk about all things geek. We talk about all things comics, all things movies, all things video games, all things toys, all things Lego, all things books, all things Star Wars, all things Mandalorian. And Phil, do you know what the best part of it all is?
It's all in canon, baby.
That's right, it's all in canon. He's Phil, I'm Boris. We will hopefully you will hear us tomorrow. Good night.